Imagine Christmas Eve. The whole family gathered around the table I built with my own hands 30 years ago. The ham is glazed and golden, the kind my wife used to make before she got sick, and I've spent 3 days trying to get it right for my daughter's sake. The candles are lit. My grandchildren are laughing about something only children find funny. And then my son-in-law sets down his fork, clears his throat, and looks at me like I'm a bill he's been putting off paying. "We need you to find somewhere else to be after the new year," he says. "You're a guest who forgot to leave." I didn't say a word. I put my napkin on the table, pushed back my chair, and started packing before they finished dessert. Before we go any further, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. I read every single one. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer for Caldwell County. The kind of work where your mistakes don't just cost money, they cost lives. So you learn early to be meticulous, to document everything, to never assume anything is understood unless it's written down. That habit saved me later in ways I never expected. My wife Carol died 2.5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, which doesn't give you much warning and less mercy. We had 37 years together. Our daughter Melissa is 36. She was 12 when I coached her soccer team, 17 when I drove her to every college visit up the East Coast, 22 when I handed her a check for her first month's rent in Atlanta. After Carol died, Melissa called me every night for 2 weeks, then every few nights, then once a week. Then she and her husband Derek suggested I sell the house in Clover Hill and come stay with them in Fairfield while I figured out my next chapter. I should have noticed the phrasing, not "come live with us, come stay," while you figure things out, like I was a problem that needed a temporary solution. I sold the house anyway. 32 years of mortgage payments, a yard I'd landscaped myself, a workshop where I'd built half the furniture in that home. I sold it because my daughter said she needed me close, and because the rooms were too quiet, and because I thought family meant something. I moved into their guest room in March. By Christmas, I apparently wore out my welcome. The dining room went silent after Derek spoke. That particular silence, that means everyone heard, and nobody wants to be the first to admit it. My grandson Tyler, who is 9, kept his eyes on his plate. My granddaughter Brooke, who is 6, looked up at me with her mother's eyes and said nothing, which is unusual for Brooke. Melissa stared at her wine glass. She didn't argue with him. She didn't look at me. She turned her face slightly toward the window, and in that angle I saw my answer clearly. She'd known he was going to say it. Guest who forgot to leave. I repeated the phrase quietly, mostly to myself. Derek had prepared for a fight. He'd lined up his words in advance, I could tell. The kind of careful preparation that comes from rehearsing in the car on the way home from work. He talked about healthy household rhythms. He talked about the children needing consistent routines. He talked about needing space to function as a nuclear family unit, which is a phrase that tells you a great deal about a person. I am not a man who pleads. Carol used to say that was both my best quality and my worst. I pushed back from the table, kissed Brooke on the top of her head, and told Tyler I'd see him soon. I didn't look at Melissa. I went upstairs and started filling the same 2 suitcases I'd brought in March. The guest room still had Carol's reading lamp on the nightstand. I'd brought it from Clover Hill because the light was softer and I couldn't sleep without it. I wrapped it in a sweater, packed it between my folded shirts. Outside, the neighbors' Christmas lights were blinking red and green against the dark. Someone on the street was playing carols. It was 22 degrees. Melissa came to the doorway while I was buckling the second suitcase. She leaned against the frame and crossed her arms, and for a moment she looked exactly like Carol when Carol was trying not to cry and winning. "You don't have to leave tonight," she said. "It's Christmas Eve." I looked at her for a long moment. "Did you know he was going to say that at dinner?" She didn't answer. Which was her answer. I carried the suitcases down myself. Derek had retreated to the living room. I heard the television on. I set my bags by the front door, went back to the kitchen for my toolbox and the accordion folder of financial records I kept in the hall closet, the kind of thick, weathered folder that accumulates when you spend decades tracking every dollar you've ever moved. I'd been meaning to reorganize it. I was glad I hadn't. The Uber driver was a young guy named Marcus who had Christmas music playing low and didn't ask questions. I gave him the name of the first motel I found on my phone, a Holiday Inn Express on Garrison Road, 14 minutes away from my daughter's house, which felt like the right distance for the moment. Not fleeing, relocating. The front desk clerk worked on Christmas Eve with the particular resignation of someone who needs the holiday pay. She slid me a key card without ceremony. Room 118. The hallway smelled of industrial cleaner and someone's takeout. The room had a coffee maker, a stiff bedspread patterned with abstract shapes, and a window overlooking the parking lot. I set Carol's lamp on the nightstand, plugged it in, and sat on the edge of the bed in my good clothes, still dressed for Christmas dinner. My phone showed 11 missed calls from Melissa by midnight. I didn't answer any of them. I ordered coffee from the lobby at 6 in the morning, took out the accordion folder, and started doing what engineers do when they need to understand a problem. I documented everything. 9 months. That was how long I'd lived in their house. In those 9 months, I had paid the full mortgage every month, which was $2,200. I had replaced the hot water heater in August when it failed, which cost $1,100. I had paid for Tyler's football equipment, cleats, pads, helmet, and the registration fee for the fall league, totaling $680. I had covered Brooke's preschool tuition for the fall semester because they said money was tight, which was $3,600. I had paid the homeowner's insurance renewal in September because Derek said he'd gotten behind on bills, which was $1,800. I had bought every grocery for 9 months, roughly $600 a month, because I cooked dinner most nights, which was another $5,400. I also co-signed their car loan when Derek's credit score dropped below the threshold the dealer required. That car was a $38,000 SUV. The loan was in both our names. That morning I built the real number, not counting the house down payment I'd given them 6 years ago, which was $40,000 from my retirement savings. Not counting Melissa's college, 4 years at a state school plus 1 year of graduate school, which I'd paid in full rather than have her carry debt into her career. Not counting the $18,000 business loan Derek needed 3 years ago when his contracting company hit a rough stretch, a loan he paid back $6,000 of before quietly stopping, and which I'd never formally pressed him on. Just the 9 months in their house. Just what was provable with receipts and bank statements. $27,380. Guest who forgot to leave. I called my old colleague Pete Adkins on the morning of December 26th. Pete had retired from Caldwell County 2 years before me and spent his first retirement year taking long walks and his second year going quietly insane with boredom. He'd since started consulting part-time and knew everyone in Fairfield because he'd lived there for 40 years. I told him what happened over the phone, just the facts, the way we used to brief each other on project status. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need?" "A place to stay for a few weeks while I sort this out," I said. "And maybe someone who knows a good attorney." He told me to come over. Pete's guest room had a window that looked out onto a bird feeder he'd built himself from cedar scraps, which told me everything I needed to know about how he was doing in retirement. His wife, Barbara, made eggs and didn't treat me like a charity case, which I appreciated more than I knew how to say. Over breakfast, I laid out the accordion folder on their kitchen table, and Pete studied the numbers in silence the way engineers study load calculations. He pushed his reading glasses up and looked at me. "You documented all of this." "I documented everything. Old habit." He nodded slowly. "My son-in-law in Phoenix tried something similar with my father-in-law. Convinced him to put his name on a joint account for convenience, then moved $60,000 into another account before anyone noticed." He turned the mug in his hands. "These things follow pattern." "That's what I was afraid of," I said. The attorney's name was Renee Okafor. She worked out of an office on Merchant Street, small and deliberate, the kind of practice where the walls are lined with actual books instead of decorative ones. Pete had used her for estate planning. She met with me on December 28th and spent 90 minutes going through the accordion folder without comment, only occasionally asking me to clarify a date or confirm a figure. When she finished, she set the folder down and looked at me the way structural engineers look at a report with problems they already suspected. "The co-signed car loan is the most actionable piece," she said. "They can't refinance it without your cooperation. That gives you leverage. The mortgage payments, the insurance, the tuition. These establish financial contribution. They also establish that you were not a guest in any meaningful legal sense. She folded her hands. Did you have anything in writing about the arrangement? Anything at all? I pulled out a single page from the folder. It was a text message I'd screenshotted and printed, from Melissa, dated the week before I moved in. Dad, please come stay. We have the room, and Derek and I want to help you get back on your feet. We can figure out the details when you're here. Renee looked at it. Then she looked at me. Get back on your feet. You were paying $2,200 a month in mortgage while staying there. Yes. She made a note. Don't cancel the co-signed loan obligations yet. Don't contact them in writing about money. And don't sell or transfer anything. She closed her legal pad. Come back Thursday. I'll have some options for you. I called Melissa that evening. Not because I was ready to talk, but because Tyler had sent me a text message that just said, Grandpa, are you okay? And a 9-year-old who does that deserves to have his grandfather call back. She answered on the second ring. Her voice had that careful quality of someone who has been waiting and has rehearsed the opening. Dad, I'm sorry about how it happened. The timing was... I stopped her. I asked her one question. Did you or Derek take any steps to claim ownership of my personal property in the house? The furniture? The tools in the garage? She paused. What? No. Dad, why would... Because I want to be sure before I arrange to retrieve it. I'm sending Pete Adkins on Saturday with his truck, if that's all right. Another pause. Longer. Dad, can we just talk about this like a family? I'd like to, I said. But when I tried at Christmas, Derek explained that I was a guest who forgot to leave. So I left. When you're ready to have a different conversation, you know how to reach me. Give the kids my love. I hung up before she could answer, which I won't pretend didn't feel like something. Pete and Barbara came Saturday with their pickup and a trailer Pete used for hauling lumber. Derek opened the door and made a point of not helping, which was fine. Pete made a point of writing down every single item we loaded, with a description and approximate value, on a legal pad he then signed and dated. I watched Derek's face change when he realized what Pete was doing. That was an education. My tools went into Pete's garage. My furniture, the pieces I'd brought from Clover Hill, went into a rented storage unit on Route 9. Carol's lamp was already with me. I left the bedroom the way I'd found it and took nothing that wasn't mine. Standing in the driveway loading the last boxes, I heard Brooke's voice from an upstairs window. She'd been told to stay in her room. I looked up, and she was pressed against the glass, one small hand flat against it. I waved. She waved back. That was harder than the dinner table had been. I started looking for an apartment the same week. Fairfield had a supply of older buildings near the center of town, the kind from the 1960s that weren't fashionable but were solid and well-maintained, the kind of building a structural engineer can appreciate. I found a one-bedroom on the third floor of a building on Clement Avenue, 12 minutes from Pete and Barbara, with enough closet space for the things I needed, and a small second room I could use for the drafting table I hadn't touched since retirement. The rent was $1,050 a month. I signed a 12-month lease on January 3rd. Pete helped me move in. Barbara brought food. It was less lonely than the Holiday Inn, and more honest than the guest room on Crawford Street. The Fairfield Senior Resource Center was not somewhere I expected to find myself. Pete mentioned it without pressure, just said a colleague of his had found it useful after his own family troubles, and left the information on the kitchen counter. I went on a Tuesday evening in January, mostly because the alternative was eating dinner alone in front of the news, which I'd been doing for 11 days and was ready to stop. The coordinator was a woman named Doris Harmon, retired school principal, who ran the room like a faculty meeting but with better coffee. 8 people in a circle of chairs. I was the youngest by 4 years. Everyone there had a version of the same story. Different names, different houses, different dollar amounts, but the same underlying architecture. You gave everything. You trusted the relationship. Someone decided that made you a resource rather than a person. The specifics varied. The feeling at the end of it didn't. Howard had been a pharmacist. His son had borrowed against Howard's home equity line to cover gambling debts. When Howard discovered it, the son said Howard was confused about the paperwork, that Howard had authorized everything. Howard was 71 and had been a pharmacist for 40 years and had never once confused himself about paperwork in his life. He sat in the circle with his hands on his knees and told the story with careful, quiet anger. Evelyn had paid for her grandson's private school tuition for 6 years because her daughter insisted the public schools in their district weren't adequate. When Evelyn ran short on savings one year and asked if they could revisit the arrangement, her daughter told her she was selfish, and hadn't she always put herself first? I told my story without dramatizing it. The numbers, the dates, the Christmas Eve dinner, the suitcases. Doris took notes. Howard leaned forward when I mentioned the co-signed car loan. "That's leverage," he said. "Same way a structural element can be a vulnerability or a load-bearing point depending on how you use it." He was a pharmacist who spoke in engineering terms. I liked him immediately. By the end of the evening, Doris had given me 3 referrals. Renee Okafor, whom I'd already retained, a financial advisor who specialized in asset protection for seniors, and a mediator who worked with estranged families when both parties were eventually willing. I folded the papers into my jacket pocket and drove home thinking about Howard and his pharmacy counter and his son who thought confusion was a defense. Renee's Thursday appointment came with a plan and a set of documents. The first was a formal accounting, on letterhead, of all financial contributions I'd made to my daughter and son-in-law over the last 7 years, organized by category with supporting documentation attached. College, $74,000. Wedding contribution, $15,000. Business loan to Derek, $18,000, with $12,000 outstanding. Down payment gift, $40,000. Monthly contributions during residence, 9 months, $27,380. Total documented, $174,380. She slid the second document across the desk. "This is a notification to Derek's auto lender that you're requesting to be removed as co-signer and that you expect full refinancing within 60 days, or you'll be initiating your legal rights regarding the loan." "What are my legal rights regarding the loan?" She looked at me steadily. "As co-signer, you have certain remedies if the primary borrower defaults or if the loan terms become problematic. I'd rather not detail them to you right now, because I'd rather Derek's attorney had to figure it out." I signed the document. The third piece was simpler. A letter to Melissa, sent certified mail, stating that my monthly mortgage contribution was ending as of February 1st, that this decision was final, and that any concerns about the financial impact should be directed to Renee's office. I asked Renee what she expected them to do. She picked up her pen. Panic, then call, then threaten, then eventually sit down, in that order. Most of them do. The call came on January 19th. Not Melissa. Derek. His voice had the tightly controlled quality of someone who has been angry for a long time and recently started being afraid. He asked me if I understood what stopping the mortgage payment would mean for their credit. I told him I'd been informed. He asked me what I wanted. I told him that was a longer conversation, and I'd be happy to have it once both he and Melissa were ready to have it honestly, through proper channels, with their own attorney present. He called me a vindictive old man. I told him the number I'd calculated, $174,380. He was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted. He said that those were gifts. That gifts don't come with conditions or repayment expectations. I said that I agreed completely, and that since they were gifts, there was no debt, and we were simply discussing what I chose to give going forward, and I was choosing to give nothing, effective February 1st. The line went quiet again. Then he said, "You'll never see those kids again." I'd been expecting that one. I kept my voice level. "Tyler is 9. Brooke is 6. They're going to grow up. I have documentation of 37 years of providing for this family. Whatever story you tell them, they'll eventually have access to the same records I do. I'm comfortable with that. Are you?" He hung up. I sat in the apartment for a while after that, at the drafting table I'd set up in the small second room. I wasn't drafting anything. I was just sitting somewhere that felt like mine. There's a diner in Fairfield called Campbell's, on the corner of 5th and Garrison. Been there since 1971, according to the faded sign by the door. The coffee is reliable, and the booth vinyl is cracked but comfortable. the kind of place where the regular staff know your order. I'd started going twice a week since moving to Clement Avenue, mostly because the eggs were good and I wanted somewhere that wasn't the apartment. The waitress, who usually worked my section, was named Gail. She was somewhere in her 50s, moved with the efficiency of someone who'd worked the same floor for years, and had the particular gift of knowing when someone wanted conversation and when they wanted to be left alone. She read me correctly for 3 weeks. On the 4th week, she filled my coffee and said, "You're the man who moved into the Clement building, aren't you? Pete Adkins mentioned you come here." I told her I was. She said Pete had told her the basics. "Not gossip," she added. "He was worried about you. He said you were too polite to show it." That surprised me enough that I told her the rest of it over 2 cups of coffee. She listened with the focused attention of someone who doesn't have time to waste on anything less than the real story. When I finished, she said, "Your daughter knew he was going to say it at Christmas dinner." "Yes." Gail refilled someone else's cup without looking away from me. "That's the part that matters, isn't it? Not him, her. I hadn't said it that plainly before, but yes, that was the part that sat heaviest." She set the coffee pot down. "My father worked the county roads for 33 years. When he got too old for it, my brother decided he was a burden. Took 6 months of effort to reverse everything my brother had done to Dad's finances." She straightened a paper napkin on the counter. "People like your daughter tell themselves they're keeping the peace. They're not. They're just choosing a side quietly." I thought about that for the rest of the day. The Fairfield Gazette ran a series on elder financial exploitation in February. 4 articles over 3 weeks. The reporter, a young man named Chris Aldridge, who looked approximately 30 and asked questions like someone much older, had been referred to Doris at the Resource Center. Doris had referred him to me. We met at Campbell's. I brought the accordion folder. He spent 2 hours going through it, asking careful questions, never leading me toward anything dramatic, just asking for the next fact, and the one after that. At the end he said, "Can I ask you something off the record?" "Go ahead." He said, "What do you want to happen?" I thought about it. "I want my grandchildren to grow up in a stable home. I want my daughter to understand what happened and why it was wrong. And I want other people in this situation to know they have options." He nodded. He wrote something down, then looked up. "Not revenge?" "I'm an engineer," I said. "I don't build things to watch them fall. I build them so they hold." The first article ran on February 14th. It used my full name, which I'd authorized. It listed the documented figures. It quoted Renee on the legal protections available to seniors in similar situations. It quoted Doris on the Resource Center and included the phone number. It did not quote Derek or Melissa because they had declined to comment, which is its own kind of statement in a town of 40,000 people where most families have lived for generations. I heard about the reactions secondhand, mostly through Pete, who heard things at the hardware store and the coffee shop where he played chess on Thursday mornings. Derek's contracting company lost 2 bids in February, both from clients who'd seen the article. One of them left a review online that didn't mention the article directly, but mentioned that he preferred doing business with people of good character. The Fairfield Chamber of Commerce quietly withdrew the invitation they'd extended to Derek for a small business networking panel. The woman who ran the invitation committee had a father in the same situation Howard was in. Small towns have their own accounting systems. They run slow, but they run precise. Melissa called on February 19th. Not Derek this time. Her voice was different. The careful, rehearsed quality was gone. She sounded like my daughter in a way she hadn't since long before Christmas. She said, "Dad, I need to tell you something." "All right." "I knew," she said. "I knew he was going to say it that night. He'd been building up to it for weeks, and I kept telling myself he'd change his mind or find a better way to bring it up, or I'd figure out how to stop it." She stopped. I didn't stop it. I just sat there. "I know. I told myself it was for the marriage, that he and I needed to be on the same page, that I was doing what a wife does." Her voice thinned. "But you're my father, and you were right there." The silence went on for a moment. Outside my window, the February bare trees in the parking lot median were showing the first hair-thin outline of buds. "What happened after I left?" I asked. "We fought," she said. "Christmas night and every night since. He says I'm being manipulated by you." I think he's afraid of what you're going to do. She hesitated. Is he right to be afraid? I'm not trying to destroy anyone's life, I said. I want fairness. I want honesty. I want to be able to see my grandchildren without it being contingent on my bank account. Tyler asks about you every day. Brooke drew you a picture. She paused again. She titled it Grandpa's House and drew your apartment, even though she's never seen it. That landed somewhere I didn't expect. The apartment has a second room, I said. It's got good light. Tell her she can see it sometime, if her parents are willing. She said she'd think about it. She called back the following Tuesday. The conversation was shorter. She'd talked to a therapist, she said. She was trying to separate what she actually believed from what she'd absorbed from Derek's way of framing things. She wanted to meet in person, without Derek, without attorneys, just to talk. I said yes. We met at Campbell's on a Saturday morning. She came 20 minutes early. I was already there. She looked like she hadn't been sleeping. She'd lost some of the careful, put-together quality she usually carried, which made her look more like herself, the way people sometimes do when the performance drops. She sat across from me, and for a moment neither of us said anything. Gail brought us both coffee without asking. Dad, she said finally, I've been doing the math. So have I. She had a folded piece of paper. She'd made her own accounting. The numbers were close to mine, not identical, because she'd underestimated some things, but close enough to tell me she'd taken it seriously. I never thought of it as a running total, she said. Each thing, when it happened, felt like, this is what family does. Dad has the money. Dad wants to help. She looked at the paper, but it adds up. Yes, and then we acted like you owed it to us. Like you being there was the obligation, and the money was just separate. Her voice was careful and steady, in the way that means someone has been working very hard not to cry. Derek kept saying you were setting the household rhythm wrong, that you weren't respecting our space. But the truth is, we couldn't have made the mortgage without you, and we knew it. I let her have the silence. She said, I don't know how to fix what I did at that dinner. You sat there, I said. You knew what was coming and you sat there. That's what I need you to understand. Not just what Derek said. What you chose. She nodded. Her hands were around her coffee cup the way her mother's used to be when Carol was thinking through something hard. What do you need from me? She asked. Honesty, I said, and a real conversation about what happens next. With Derek present, when he's ready, with both our attorneys, if that's what it takes. But no more managing the truth to keep the household rhythm smooth. She said that was fair. She also said Derek was talking to someone, a counselor, which had surprised her. She didn't know what that would change. She said she didn't know a lot of things yet, and she was trying to be honest about that instead of pretending she had a plan. That was the most honest thing she'd said to me in 2 years. Possibly longer. Brooke came to see the apartment on a Sunday afternoon in March. Melissa brought her, with Derek's knowledge, if not his enthusiasm. Tyler was at a basketball tournament, but asked me to send pictures. Brooke walked in holding her drawing and immediately handed it to me, with the gravity of a child completing an important transaction. I hung it on the wall of the second room with 2 thumbtacks, in the center of the otherwise empty wall, and asked her what she thought. She studied it with her head tilted. It needs a plant, she said. We went to the garden center down the street, and she chose a small potted fern with the same seriousness she'd applied to evaluating the wall space. We brought it back, and she placed it on the windowsill of the second room herself. That's better, she said. I agreed. We had lunch at the kitchen table I'd bought from Salvation Army, and Brooke talked about her first-grade teacher, and the girl in her class who had a hamster named Biscuit, and about whether it would be better to have a hamster or a fish, because a fish can't run away, but a hamster can do tricks. I made grilled cheese because it was what she asked for. Melissa watched from the kitchen doorway. I caught her expression once when she didn't know I was looking. It was the expression of someone seeing something they almost lost and are only now understanding what it would have meant. The formal mediation happened in late March. Renee was there. Derek came with an attorney of his own, a man named Kowalski, who specialized in family disputes and had the look of someone who'd heard every version of every story and was bored by all of them. Derek had prepared a position. So had I. We sat in Renee's conference room for 3 hours. Derek did not apologize in those 3 hours. He negotiated, which is a different thing. He offered terms. I listened to them and offered mine. Renee and Kowalski translated what each side needed into language the other side could engage with, which is what mediators do when both parties are intelligent and afraid. By the end of the afternoon, we had a written agreement. Derek and Melissa would refinance the car loan within 60 days, removing my name entirely. The outstanding balance on Derek's business loan, $12,000, would be repaid at $400 a month, in writing, notarized, with Renee as the formal record keeper. I would have scheduled reliable access to Tyler and Brooke, 2 weekday evenings per month and every other Sunday, confirmed in writing, not contingent on any other factor. Both Derek and Melissa would attend family counseling for a minimum of 6 months. I would attend with them for 2 joint sessions when both parties and the counselor agreed it was appropriate. Derek signed. He didn't look at me when he did it, but he signed. I didn't need him to look at me. I needed his signature. I got it. Walking out of Renee's office into the cold March afternoon, Pete was waiting in the parking lot. I hadn't asked him to come. He'd just shown up with 2 cups of coffee from Campbell's and leaned against his truck like he had nothing better to do. He handed me a cup. "How'd it go?" "It's a beginning," I said. He nodded. "That's usually enough." The Senior Resource Center held its quarterly gathering the first week of April. Doris had expanded the membership, 23 people now, and they'd moved from the back room into the main meeting hall. Howard's case had resolved the previous month. The joint account matter settled to his benefit after the bank's fraud department became involved in ways his son had not anticipated. Evelyn had reduced her tuition contributions to a voluntary amount she'd set herself without guilt, and her daughter had accepted this after several tense weeks in which she apparently had no choice. I stood up to speak at the gathering, something I'd been asked to do and had prepared for poorly, which is unusual for me. I told them about Christmas Eve, about the accordion folder, about the Holiday Inn and Carol's lamp, and the specific cold of standing in a parking lot in February, realizing that a marriage of 37 years and a daughter you'd known since the first hour of her life were not guaranteed to survive the way you assumed they were. I told them about Brooke's drawing on the wall of the second room and the fern on the windowsill. I told them that I'd built a career on the principle that structures hold or fail, depending on whether you understand the forces acting on them, whether you're honest about load and stress, and the limits of what any material can bear. That families work the same way, and the mistake most of us in that room had made was assuming that love was structural by itself, that it could bear any load without documentation, without acknowledgement, without the honest accounting of who was carrying what. That's not sentiment, I told them. That's physics. Howard laughed at that. The room laughed with him. I told them that rebuilding was slower than breaking, that the mediation agreement was a foundation, not a house, and that I didn't know yet what the house would look like. But I told them about the Sunday afternoons with Brooke and Tyler coming now too, and how Tyler had asked me once to help him with a math problem that turned out to be a percentage calculation, and how satisfying it was to explain percentages to a 9-year-old using the honest example of how much a mortgage payment actually represents of total household income. Doris was making notes the whole time. She asked if I'd be willing to speak at a county-level seminar on elder financial protection in June. I said I would, on the condition that the accordion folder came with me, because the most useful thing I could offer anyone was the evidence of what careful documentation actually looks like in practice. She said that was exactly what she had in mind. Walking home from the center, I took the long way along Garrison, past Campbell's where the lights were still on and Gail's car was in the lot, past the storage unit on Route 9 where my furniture still sat, waiting, because the apartment was furnished well enough and there was no urgency, past the turn that would take me toward Crawford Street if I kept going, which I didn't. Spring had come late to Fairfield that year. The trees along Garrison were only just starting to color, the pale, uncertain green of early April, tentative and thin but real. Not mistaking itself for summer yet, just being what it was. Carol would have found something useful to say about that. She was good at finding the useful thing in a season. I thought about the second room in the apartment, Brooke's drawing with the 2 thumbtacks, the fern catching the afternoon window light. The drafting table where I'd started working on a side project, volunteering my structural assessment skills to an organization that helped low-income homeowners with safety inspections. Work that used the same skills I'd spent 30 years building, applied to something that had nothing to do with defending myself. There's a difference, I decided, between justice and recovery. Justice is accounting for what happened. Recovery is deciding what you build with what's left. I was still in the justice part, mostly. The mediation, the documentation, the careful distance Derek and I maintained in the 2 or 3 family situations where we'd been in the same room. That wasn't over. It would take a long time to be over, and there were no guarantees about what it would look like when it was. But the recovery part had started. I could feel it in specific ordinary moments. The plant on the windowsill, grilled cheese at the Salvation Army table, Pete leaning on his truck in a parking lot with 2 cups of coffee. Family is sometimes the one you were given. Sometimes it's the one that shows up. I put my key in the door of 3C on Clement Avenue and went inside and hung up my coat. Carol's lamp glowed softly from the nightstand. Brooke's drawing was on the second room wall. Outside, the April evening was doing what April evenings do, cooling slowly toward dark while holding on to the last of the light as long as it possibly could. That's enough, for now. That's more than enough. If this story meant something to you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Leave me a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. I read every single one. And if you want to hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for being here.